All right, I am back. I am back in Thailand for the second time this year. We spent the month of January up north in Chiang Mai, and now we are spending the month of June here in Bangkok. And I feel like Thailand really gets the spotlight when people talk about Southeast Asian countries. Bangkok always ranks, right near the top of lists of most visited cities in the entire world. It feels like every digital nomad basically has been to Chiang Mai at some point. And for good reason. This is a wonderful country, no matter what stage of life you're in. It's great for 18-year-old backpackers, it's great for middle-aged vacationers, it's great for retirees. There's something for everyone here in Thailand, but we also spent 5 weeks earlier this year in Thailand's neighbor to the south, Malaysia. And it feels like Malaysia kind of flies under the radar, at least among Americans, maybe among all Westerners, I'm not sure. But it feels like most Americans, at least, don't really know much of anything about Malaysia. And I know so many people who have been on a vacation to Thailand, but I've never really heard Malaysia come up. I see Thai food all over the place back home, but I rarely see like a Malaysian restaurant. And it's a shame because Malaysia is a truly wonderful place and I think it deserves more attention. Now, since I visited Thailand and Malaysia back to back, knowing pretty much nothing about Malaysia going in, I thought it'd be fun to just kind of share some things that I found to be quite a bit different between these two neighboring countries. So let's start with the difference that is the most immediately obvious, and that is religion. So Thailand is very obviously a Buddhist country. The stat I found online is that 94% of the population here practices Buddhism. And even if you didn't know that going in, you would very quickly figure it out. A lot of the big tourist attractions have something to do with Buddhism. There are so many Buddhist temples all over the place, and they're very visually striking. Like they stand out. If you are near a Buddhist temple, you will know. And that's not to mention all of the big, Buddha statues as well, outdoors. Yeah, there's a lot of Buddhism going on here. Now, when you get to Malaysia, you will very quickly realize that it is a Muslim country. Now, the percentage isn't quite as high. Only about 75% of the local population practices Islam. And the mosques, while they are, quite beautiful, they're not as visually obvious as your average Buddhist temple. Like there's not a bunch of, shiny gold all over the place. But despite this, I would say the presence of religion in just day-to-day life is much more obvious in Malaysia than it is in Thailand. And that is because of how people dress. So you're not always going to be around a religious structure, but you will pretty much all the time be around religious people. And when you're around someone who's Buddhist, you generally wouldn't know. Like it's not immediately obvious unless they're a monk. But in Malaysia, you see tons of women wearing a hijab everywhere you go. Now, it's not legally required in Malaysia like it is in parts of the Middle East, but still lots and lots and lots of women, walk around wearing a hijab. So I would say that makes the presence of religion just much more visually obvious just from walking down the street. And the presence of Islam in Malaysia shows up in places that I never really would have thought about ahead of time. Like, for example, when you go somewhere where people are wearing bathing suits. So when we were in Ipoh, we went to a water park, and right when you walk in, they have a sign showing the recommended attire for non-Muslims and for Muslims. And for Muslims, it's much more conservative for both men and women. And this was an interesting experience. Like I've never been to a water park where so many people were, basically completely covered from head to toe. Another place I didn't really expect this to show up is in alcohol ads. So back home in the US, on most of the alcohol ads, there's a thing that says, basically don't drink this if you're under 21 years of age. I think it's probably a legal mandate to have something like that. But in Malaysia, you have a similar thing on all of the beer ads and whatnot, but it says don't drink this if you're under 21 or Muslim, because people who strictly practice Islam do not drink alcohol. Which brings me to my second point, which is alcohol. Simply put, alcohol is much more expensive in Malaysia than it is in Thailand. Thailand is a place where you can go party, you can drink a lot, and not spend that much money. That is much more difficult to do in Malaysia. It is accessible, like it is there, you can find it easily. It's just gonna cost a lot more. And that has to do with the Muslim influence in the government. Alcohol is taxed very high in Malaysia. It is very expensive to get a liquor license in Malaysia. And also there's just less of a market for it. In Thailand, most locals do drink some amount of alcohol, whereas in Malaysia, they do not. And then there's also the legal drinking age. So it's pretty similar. It's 21 in Malaysia and 20 in Thailand. And I don't have firsthand experience drinking underage in either of these countries, but from what I've read online, it is much more strictly enforced in Malaysia. It's a lot easier to get alcohol underage in Thailand. And it's not just alcohol. Thailand recently legalized marijuana, like not just medically legal, but fully recreationally legal. And oh my God, it is everywhere. Especially in Chiang Mai. We spent a month there and we must have walked past, I don't know, at least 100 weed shops when we were there. It seems like every restaurant that closed down during the pandemic just got replaced with a weed store. And I've been to places in the US where it is legal and common, you know, like Portland or Vegas, but oh my God, this is on another level. And don't even get me started on pie, where weed is much more of the culture there. Now, I don't really care about this. I never really got into weed, even though I am from a place where it is legal. But even if you're not into it, it's impossible not to notice it. Like it's everywhere in Thailand, at least in the more touristy parts. Whereas in Malaysia, marijuana is very illegal. And the penalties for it are quite harsh. I'm sure there's a black market for it, but I would not want to be caught with weed in Malaysia. So if you're a backpacker trying to make friends and get stoned together, I would say Thailand is definitely the better place for that. Also totally unrelated, but I just walked past 2 massive monitor lizards here in Lumpini Park. Malaysia also has these, so it's not quite a difference between the 2 countries, but it is awesome to see these things. But anyway, on to my 4th point, which is backpackers. Not the wilderness definition of backpacking, but the budget traveler definition, where someone spends months or years at a time traveling around with only a backpack. And Thailand kind of feels like the epicenter of backpacking. There are so many solo travelers in their late teens and early 20s traveling around Thailand on a budget, and there are so many businesses that make it so easy to do that. In every city, or every touristy city, there are so many hostels where you can get a bed in a pretty decent place for like $5 to $10 per night. And it's also really easy to book like a last minute bus or van between cities, again, for like around $5. And if you want to go on a guided tour of a certain area, you can just show up in the nearest city and there will be dozens of tour companies lining the streets that will pair you up with a group of people going on a tour either the next day or maybe even that same day at a pretty good price. So this is amazing for budget travelers and solo travelers who want to explore an area pretty cheaply and also meet a bunch of really cool people. We've done a bunch of these tours in Thailand and just had such a great time. But in Malaysia, all of this is not nearly as much of a thing. Like it exists, there are backpackers in Malaysia, but what we found is that instead of budget hostels, you get a lot more budget hotels that are more privacy focused than community focused. And in Thailand, we got so used to finding cheap group tours by just walking down the street in a touristy area. But in Malaysia, we found this pretty hard to find. Like when we first got to Kuala Lumpur, we tried to do the same approach and couldn't really find anything. Like all the travel companies we found were more like travel agencies that'll match you up with a private driver for the day. So it makes it a lot more expensive and a lot less fun to explore the areas outside the city that you can't easily get to by train. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. In Thailand, it's so easy to just get sucked into this Western backpacker bubble to the point where I never really felt like a minority in Thailand, which is weird. Like as a white guy, I didn't really feel like a minority. I'd often look around and be like, why is everyone German? Like seriously, everything we did, we just met so many Germans all over the place in Thailand. And I'd always heard about Australians taking over Thailand, and maybe that's more true in the south, but at least up north, Germans everywhere. And it's fun. I love hanging out with Germans. They're great people, but it's also not the reason I came to Thailand. But Malaysia, at least in my experience, felt more authentic. I always felt like I was in Malaysia. I always felt like I was surrounded by Malaysians. Even when doing the touristy stuff, it seemed like it would be mostly Malaysian tourists and not too many foreigners. We spent a month in Georgetown, and I would literally go days without seeing more than maybe 1 or 2 white people, which is funny because Georgetown is just about the whitest name I can think of for a city. But when you look at the people, it's probably the least white place I've been in quite a long time. And I loved this. It felt a lot easier to immerse myself in the local life there. Now, I'm not saying my experience is the same as someone who actually lives there, right? That's obviously not the case, but it felt a lot closer to that than it ever has in Thailand. Now, on the flip side, while Thailand feels very multicultural just because of all the backpackers and expats and nomads and vacationers and all that, Malaysia is a lot more multicultural among the locals. So here in Thailand, most of the locals are ethnically Thai, which makes sense. But in Malaysia, only about half the population is ethnically Malay, which I had no idea about going in. A huge portion of the population is ethnically Chinese or Indian. And again, I really enjoyed this. It felt like getting a glimpse of multiple different cultures all in one place. For example, about half the population of Georgetown is Chinese, and we happened to be there during February, during Chinese New Year, and they go hard for Chinese New Year. We went to so many different Chinese New Year celebrations, and they were some of the richest cultural experiences I've had since we started traveling. Like, I might honestly have to make a full video just about that. It was incredible. But yeah, getting to start off the day with a Malay dish like nasi lemak, and then explore Little India in the afternoon, and then end the night at a Chinese parade just makes for such a good day. And having this more multicultural society affects the language as well. So last year, me and Lexi traveled around Europe for a while, and almost everywhere we went, like, everyone spoke English pretty fluently. But in Thailand, not so much. I get the sense that English education just isn't nearly as prevalent in Thailand. There's definitely been way more of a language barrier here than there has been pretty much anywhere else. And I will say most Thai people we've encountered do speak a little bit of English, like at least enough to do their jobs for an English-speaking customer base. Like, most people at restaurants know the common restaurant words, people in hotels know the common hotel words, but in terms of like having an actual conversation, I found it to be much more difficult in Thailand than most of the places we've been. In Malaysia, however, the language barrier was practically non-existent. Like, I'd basically call Malaysia an English-speaking country. I know that's probably not as much of the case in the more rural areas, but at least where we are, at least where we went, we could go basically anywhere, and everyone spoke English. We could have a full conversation with anyone, and they wouldn't struggle one bit. And that's also the case even if you're not talking to people. So in Thailand, a lot of the menus, at least outside of the touristy areas, are only in Thai. Like, maybe there will be an English menu, maybe not, but like, you have to ask for it. And that's certainly the case in our current neighborhood in Bangkok. But in Malaysia, the English menu is just always right there out in the open. Same thing if you take a Grab somewhere. So in Thailand, the driver's phone will have the UI in Thai. And if they have the radio on, even if it's English-speaking music, in between songs, the DJ will be speaking Thai. Whereas in Malaysia, the driver's phone, I think every ride we had, the driver's phone is just fully in English. On the radio, the DJ will be speaking English in between songs. Like, yeah, even though Malay is technically the official language of Malaysia, it often feels like English is the predominant language, at least where we were. And I think that's because there are so many cultures and languages going on in Malaysia. I've noticed in other parts of the world as well that when you have a place that is very multilingual, English tends to be one of those languages. Plus, if you go back far enough in Malaysia's history, you also have the British Empire thing going on, so I'm sure that contributes as well. And this led to a feeling that I didn't really expect. So I used to think that by going to a place where fewer people speak English, that it would feel like a deeper, more authentic cultural experience. But I found that the reality is that it's just so easy to get sucked into this foreigner bubble. Whereas in a place like Malaysia, where so many people speak English, I never really felt the desire to meet other foreigners, and there weren't as many there to begin with. So once again, it felt more like I was just kind of living among the locals. And finally, food. I obviously can't talk about Southeast Asia for this long without talking about food. I love the food in Southeast Asia. Out of the 31 countries I've been to worldwide, Malaysia is the best food country I have ever been to in my life. And Thailand is not far behind. So instead of talking about the food itself though, I want to talk about how it's sold, at least when it comes to street food. And I am going to use the term street food a little bit loosely here. So yes, there is some food that is literally made and sold on the street, but I'm also going to include the super bare bones restaurants that are essentially a street cart, but like inside an actual building with tables and chairs and whatnot. I don't know if there's a better blanket term to describe all this, so I'm just gonna call all of it street food, whether or not it is literally sold on the street. And I will say Thailand seems to have more of a vibrant street food scene, or at least it's more obvious, it's more in your face. In every city I've been in Thailand, in every neighborhood, there are so many streets that just have food lining the streets, like dozens of street carts selling food. Anything from little bites to full meals. But I would say it skews more towards little bites. A lot of the street carts just have things like meat on a stick or spring rolls, or there's a huge variety of things, and it's all really delicious food, but not stuff you'd want to eat as like a full meal. And this is great if you just want to sample a bunch of things. It's so easy to forego a meal here by just eating 5 or 6 of these little bites from street carts. And if you want a full legit meal from a street cart in Thailand, you can certainly find that as well, especially if it's like a rice dish or a noodle dish or a soup. But I would say the street food scene in Malaysia skews more towards these actual meals that'll really fill you up. Like my favorite nasi kandar place just on a street corner in Georgetown, Malaysia, practically sends me into a food coma when I eat it. Like, it's so much food. And while there certainly are some of these one-off vendors on the street, in Malaysia, a lot of them seem to be centered or clustered into hawker centers. So basically you have a lot of these places where you'll walk into a building and have like 10 to 20 of these street vendors just all selling food, but like under a roof, and you get real tables and real plates and silverware and stuff, and you get a toilet, but it still basically is street carts that you're buying from. And this is honestly my favorite way to eat a meal, because you kind of get the best of everything at these hawker centers. You get the variety and the affordability that you would get out on the street. But you also have things like shelter, which can be super important because some of those tropical storms are no joke. The hawker centers in Malaysia are honestly a big part of why I feel like Malaysia is the greatest food country I've ever been to. So when it comes to food on a budget, I think both these countries have their pros and cons. I think Thailand is better for vacationers, or someone who is constantly on the go, someone who wants to try a million different things. And I think Malaysia is better for someone who's just kind of in one place for a while and just wants to sit down and have a meal, but at a fraction of the cost of an actual restaurant. So if you're watching this video wanting to know which is a better country to visit, I really can't answer that. These are both wonderful, wonderful countries, and it really depends on your personal preferences. But I will give some general opinions. I would say if you're a solo backpacker, maybe right after high school or right after college, and you want to bounce around on a budget and make lots of friends, meet lots of like-minded travelers, Thailand is pretty unbeatable. Like I said, Thailand feels like the backpacker capital of the world, and there is a very good reason for that. But if you're past that stage in your life and you're traveling with an existing group of friends or maybe a partner, I would say give Malaysia a shot. It has a lot of the things that are appealing about Thailand, but it felt, at least to me, like a more low-key and authentic experience. During my time in Malaysia, I felt like I was actually in Malaysia the whole time and never really got sucked into this foreigner, nomad, expat, whatever bubble. And I'm curious what you all think. If you're from Thailand or Malaysia, let me know in the comments why you think people should visit your country. Or if you've been to either of these places, let me know if your experience was the same as mine or different than mine. I'm very curious to hear what other people's experiences are. And I did film this video in Thailand, but if you want to see some of Malaysia, go check out this video. I filmed a video where I went into the food culture in Southeast Asia and Malaysia in particular. So yeah, go check out that video and I will see you in the next one.